Good morning, everybody, and thank you all for joining us at Pontypridd Children's Book Festival. We've got a real treat for you now coming up over the next half an hour. I'm talking to Hanan Issa and Matt Brown about their new book, The Mab, which is a retelling of the ancient stories of the Mabinogion. Now, there are lots of myths and legends and adventures in these stories and more than a little bit of magic, so this is going to be a lot of fun. And we'll be getting a sneak peek at their stories for the first time, so we're really lucky this morning. So before we start talking about the book, if I could just ask you both to introduce yourself. So Hanan, you're a poet.
Yeah, I'm a poet and a writer, and I live in Cardiff. And I'm really excited to be here.
Thank you for coming this morning. And Matt, so you've written quite a few children's books, and you're taking in time travel and aliens and that kind of thing. So tell us a bit about you.
Yeah, well, I'm Matt. I am a human man. Notice Hanan didn't specify her planet of origin. I noticed, and yeah, I've been writing children's books for about 6 or 7 years. And I do other things as well. I sometimes chat on the radio, and I'm a dad, and my ambition really, I think, is to play backgammon for Great Britain.
Excellent. Well, I hope you get there.
Thank you.
So turning to the Mab now, this is a really exciting new book. Can you tell us a bit about where the idea came from, Matt?
Yeah, I can. It sort of revolved around the fact that about 2 years ago, I wanted to buy an English language version of all the stories to read to my son, because he was about 10 at the time, and he always really loved stories about magic and adventure, and I thought that they would be right up his street, because that's essentially what they are. And I looked online and I couldn't find a version that had all 11 stories, a sort of complete English translation, which I found really surprising. Obviously, there are some stories that have been translated, and I mean an English language version of all the stories for kids is what I mean. And so I thought, oh, that's really weird that hasn't happened. And then sort of fast forward 18 months later, coronavirus swept the country. I was sitting around, and I can remember going on. It was like this time last year. It was last April. Was really, really sunny and hot. And I remember being on a dog walk with my wife, and I said to her, I think I'm going to spend some time trying to put together a version of the Mabinogion for kids, and I'm going to do it. And the idea was just really obvious that there were 11 stories, and I knew a few other Welsh children's writers who worked for the same publisher. So I knew Sophie Anderson, who's written The Girl Who Speaks Bear and The House of Chicken Legs and those brilliant books. I knew P.G. Bell as well. And I recently met Claire Fayers at the 2019 Pontypridd Book Festival. Yeah. And so I thought, well, I'll start with those guys and see whether they think it's a good idea. And they were all like, oh my God, this is a really good idea. We'd love to take part. And and P.G. Bell said, "What, you need to speak to Eloise Williams, who's the Children's Laureate for Wales, because she'll be brilliant and she'd love it." And I did, and we got on really, really well together and made each other laugh a lot. And we decided we'd co-edit it together and sort of put it together, and we did. And a year later, we've got the funding for it, which we had to raise ourselves, and we're going to publish sometime in spring 2022.
Fantastic. And Hanan then, so as Matt was saying then, there are 11, am I right in thinking 11 different authors with 11 different stories? So what made you want to get involved? I mean, it sounds like a really exciting project, so I can imagine. But what was it for you that really kind of piqued your interest?
Well, I feel a bit like an interloper, because I haven't officially written anything for children before, but I've got an 8-year-old son who is my harshest critic, actually. And yeah, similar to Matt, I've been looking for an English language version of the Mabinogi, because I loved the story of Lleu Gyfes, and I wanted to kind of share the rest of the stories with him and yeah, couldn't find it. And I met Eloise as part of the Hay Writers at Work. We were writing there together, part of that group. And she's like my literary big sister. And I was talking to her and saying, I'd love to get into, children's writing a bit more. And I suppose because we'd had that conversation, it really made sense. And when she sort of suggested it, I jumped on it because, yeah, I think it's very exciting. And the more just hearing Matt talk about that, I'm just really excited to get my hands on a copy of the whole book.
As we all are. So what kinds of stories are they, Matt? Because we've touched upon obviously they're from the Mabinogion, they're very old stories, but what can we expect when we read them?
Well, they are, I sort of liken them to, like, you've got Nordic myths, you've got Thor, you've got Odin, you've got Greek myths, your Zeus, your your Hera, all of those stories. And Wales has got the Mabinogion. And so they are stories of adventure. They are stories that often talk about the sort of relationship between the real world and the other world, what's called the Otherworld in sort of Celtic mythology. And that is just sort of like the land of the dead and the land of magic. And recently on May Day, there's a festival in Wales, an old festival in Wales on the 1st of May, because the belief is that May Day is a day when the two worlds sort of come into contact with each other, and it's possible to sort of like travel between the two. And essentially, I think that's what the Mab is. It's about traveling between these two worlds. So you've got the world of the real, you've got world of Wales, you've got the world of mountains and oceans, and within that world you've got giants and evil magicians and dragons and knights going on adventure. It's the very first. These are really old. These stories, they're the oldest British stories that were ever written down. And King Arthur makes his first appearance in these stories. And what I find interesting is that if you ask kids have they heard of King Arthur, they'd say, oh yeah, we've heard of King Arthur. But if you ask them if they'd heard of the Mabinogion, probably quite a few of them wouldn't have heard of them. And so our mission really is to try and take these amazing stories and introduce them to new generations of people.
I was going to ask about that. How important is it then? Because obviously there are Welsh heritage. How important is it, that these stories are retold and re-available, I guess, for everybody today, for children today?
Well, Hannah and I were having a chat a little while ago, and her story that she's written has a character called Ysbaddaden, the bad one, in. Wow. Am I pronouncing that right, Hannah?
Yeah, Ysbaddaden, I think
Ysbaddaden.
it's yeah.
Sorry. And Ysbaddaden means hawthorn in it's in Welsh, or that's where the name comes from. And hawthorn was something that was collected on May the 1st by people. And also in Hanan's story, there's a story about an eagle who lived at the ends of the earth, and the ends of the earth were sort of in the north of Wales, on the sort of Llŷn Peninsula, or round about Snowdonia. And I was reading last week that Snowdonia wants to have its name changed back to the Welsh name, which means eagle. So you sort of think there are all these interesting, weird, unusual, brilliant connections between these stories, and because they're so old, they've just sort of like, their fingers are just everywhere. They just touch everything. Their fingerprints are all over the landscape and all over the culture of not just Wales but Britain and the Celtic world as well. So I think that, and there are stories, right? And I think people should know about them.
So really, for everybody listening today, what you guys are saying is look out of the window and the mountains that you see and the mist coming down from the mountains, that's all our kind of myths and legends, and that's the kind of stuff that we're gonna get to read about in your book.
Yeah.
But Hanan, one thing I was wondering, as these are a retelling of these very old stories, does that mean they're going to be set in the modern time? I sound very old there, don't I? In modern
In
times.
the modern time.
Will the characters have phones and Xboxes and that kind of thing, or have you kept it traditional?
No, they won't be. I think that was a discussion that Matt had very early on with all of us writers, saying, please don't do that. What were your thoughts about that though, Matt? Why didn't you want iPhones in the Mab?
I think because, there was one of our writers who makes a brilliant point that myths and legends are essentially things that you can pour like now into, right? And there's I think a really good example in the story of Blodeuwydd, who is the woman who's made out of flowers, and who is she has got no choice in the matter. In this matter, she's just conjured from flowers, and then someone says, "Oh, you're married to that bloke over there," and it feels like that you can have a very modern take on, or a modern take on that, not a very modern take, of like, hang on a minute, this is my life we're talking about, not your life. And it felt like I wanted to get that into the stories, that all of the stories could have that, but that setting them giving them modern accoutrements like mobile phones or whatever, just felt a bit like it was a step further down the line. And that these stories, I felt, because they are rooted in landscapes and times gone by, I wanted them to sort of stay there for this incarnation. And I would love for somebody to do a more modern take. In fact, Serin Books a few years ago produced a series with all 11 stories that were just retold as modern stories, which are amazing. But that isn't what I wanted to do. I wanted to have them set in their sort of medieval sort of setting.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's something what I found was when I was retelling mine, it was quite interesting how, as a woman, I found it quite hard, the fact that Olwen is her sort of contribution is so reduced. Mm. And so, thinking about, young children, like, children reading that, they're not going to believe that this woman was just sort of, yeah, sure, just, save me. And just that passivity, I just don't know whether, we believe that today. So, yeah, it was interesting trying to sort of maneuver the story and retell it in a way that felt authentic to the story, but feels authentic to how potentially a woman of today might act and feel.
Yeah, I guess with them being such old stories, kind of rooted in their time. Behavior is a lot different today, isn't it? And we don't necessarily always want to read about rescuing princesses and that kind of thing. The princesses can rescue themselves, can't they?
Quite right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think as well that Sophie Anderson's story, she's written the story about Branwen, who's quite a famous character in these stories. And she did a lot of sort of digging about the history of the story, and actually found that there would have been a time when these stories, where that exactly would have happened. When these stories were told originally, the women probably did have more, more sense of control over their lives. But over the years, they were retold with a different bias because men were in charge.
Yeah.
And one of the nice things is for her is that she's been able to sort of recalibrate the balance a bit on that. And I think that all of the stories do that to an extent, which I think is brilliant. And also, I sort of think this is our chance to retell these stories. In 1,000 years' time, there might be somebody else. There'll be another version of the Mabinogion, and that's brilliant. But right now, these are ours, and so we're going to do them the way we want to do them.
Excellent. And you say they're obviously about having lots of female writers involved. So, Hanan, if we could hear a bit more about your story. So, which story is it that you have chosen to retell?
So it's Culhwch and Olwen.
Okay. And am I right in thinking that we're going to get a sneak peek?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Do you want me to dive in? So I've retitled the story The Amazing Eight. If I asked you to think of a courageous hero, you might pick one with a magnificent sounding name like Thor, Aragon, maybe Mulan. Well, not all heroes are like that. The hero of this story is called Cilwch, and Cilwch means pig shed, because that was the place that he was born. Despite his unfortunate name, Cilwch is the hero of our story, and it all begins with a curse. I curse you, Cilwch, said his wicked stepmother, to only love Olwen, daughter of the fearsome giant king, Ysbyddaden the Bad One. Now, this was a particularly nasty curse, since Ysbyddaden the Bad One was known for his cruelty. He was also superstitious, as giants often are, and believed that if Olwen were to fall in love, he would die. And so he kept his daughter a prisoner in his castle, guarded by a fearsome army. But Cilwch was not afraid. The curse filled his heart with a desire to free Olwen, but he knew he could not do it alone. Cilwch asked his cousin, the famous warrior King Arthur, for help. Arthur agreed to join the quest to free Olwen with his crew of incredible warriors. There was Bedr One Hand, who never missed a target. Menw, the shapeshifter, who could take any form and had the power of invisibility. Gurhir, who spoke every language in the world. Cynddylig, the guide, who never ever got lost. Gwalchmai, the knight who was so lucky that he won every task he had ever undertaken. And finally, Kai, who could go 9 whole days without sleeping or breathing, and he could grow as tall as a tree. He had the power to conjure fire from his fingertips. With Cilwch and King Arthur, that made a total of 8. The amazing 8, said Cilwch as they set off on their quest.
Wow.
Yes.
That is brilliant. I can't wait to hear the rest of that. That sounds amazing.
I just had goosebumps then listening to that. It's amazing.
Thank
It
you.
is a cool story. I'm not going to lie.
That sounds like a fantastic adventure.
Yeah. One thing that I was saying to Hanan earlier about that I love about her retelling is that she's really taken that idea that like there are, that Thor is part of the Norse mythology, but is also a Marvel superhero, and that Hanan has created this sort of like band of superheroes that wander around the country. It's so cool.
Yeah, I was thinking that actually, the not only your characters, the band of superheroes that you said there, Matt, but also bringing all the writers together. That's kind of, all the 11 writers. It's kind of
Authors assemble.
Yes, assembling a band of superhero writers.
That's right, yeah.
Oh, that was wonderful. Thank you, Hanan. And before you read us a bit from yours, Matt, we've touched upon it a little bit, but, we were talking about these stories obviously being very, very old. But what can we get from them today? Why would children and young people today, what would they take from them, do you think?
Well, I don't know. I don't know what Hanan thinks about this, but I mean, like I said, I think that that myths are stories that you can pour things in from now. They work really well as a sort of template and can make you think about things in a way that you might not have done. And I think that does happen in things like the Marvel universe, where they take sort of, something like Ragnarok, Thor Ragnarok, where they take this sort of something that is in the Norse mythology and they sort of like make it relevant now. And I think that's why myths are so brilliant, because you can put in things that are important now onto stories that were written a long time ago. Like we've just been talking about, the fact that suddenly we're able to make the women in the stories more powerful, give them more action, make them more in control of their lives, so that they don't like women today, don't have to worry about what some stupid bloke thinks. And in fact, a lot of the men in the stories just makes really clumsy, stupid mistakes, and it's often sorted out by the women, which is pretty much my experience of my own life.
And would you agree, Hannah? That for young people today reading these stories, that the messages in them, and the kind of the things that they're about are still really not only relevant but still really interesting to young people today.
Yeah, I think, the bare bones of a hero story is what's timeless, isn't it? I mean, you can pick any story from Finding Nemo to, the Odyssey, and you'll be able to find that same sort of bare bones of how the story moves across. It's timeless. And I think there is definitely something for any time and anyone to sort of glean from and enjoy. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, that brings us on to Matt and your story. So which story have you chosen to retell?
I'm telling the story of Rhiannon and Poith, which is known as the first branch of the Mabinogion. So that's what people will know it as. But I've called my story Rhiannon, Poith and the Hideous Claw.
Sounds good. And are we going to get a sneak peek? Yeah,
absolutely. And I would say that for those who don't know, most of my stories that I write are funny. And so I've tried to make, even though the subject matter in this story is quite tragic, I've tried to make it funny.
Excellent. Well,
we'll see whether that works out or not.
Please read for us.
Okay. Poith, Prince of Dyfed, Lord of the Seven Lands, and 3-time winner of the South West Wales Most Extraordinary Trousers competition, was bored. Being a prince was not nearly as much fun as he'd imagined. He was sick and tired of all the feasting and the dancing and the endless fawning from people saying things like, "Oh, wow, you look so great, my lord," or "Have you done something with your hair, my lord, because it looks amazing," or "That's the funniest thing anyone has ever said, my lord." Poith gazed at the leaden sky and longed for something more. "I long for something more," he said, a little unnecessarily. "Well, my lord," said Simon, his groom, pointing at a nearby hill, "we should take a trip up Gorsedd Arberth." "That boring old hill," said Poith. "Why?" Simon smiled. "Adventure," he said. "It is whispered that those who look down from its summit will either see something wonderful or something awful will happen to them." He paused. "By the way, have you done something with your hair, my lord? Because it looks amazing." Anything will be better than this, Poith thought, and changed into his favourite pair of adventure trousers made from the very finest action silk. Then he and Simon went to the stables, saddled their horses, rode off. At the top of Gorsedd Arberth, the clouds sat low and the air was heavy and damp. A cold wind blew around Poith, and he wrapped his cloak tightly around him. "I hope that this wondrous or awful thing will hurry up," he muttered, as a crow's caw floated on the wind. But he had barely spoken when shafts of morning sunshine burst through the cloud, and down in the valley, Poith suddenly saw a horse and rider caught in a blade of sunlight. The horsewoman shimmered like a heat haze, at once both there and not there. Poith watched her and her magnificent, shining white horse amble along the road that weaved around the bottom of the hill. "Go down to her, Simon," he said. "I must find out who she is. She reminds me of a dream I once had." The groom nodded and took off down the hill. But even though he was a skilled horseman, by the time Simon reached the road, the woman had passed him, and all he could see was her back fading from view. In fact, she was so far away that neither Simon nor Poith saw her glance over her shoulder and smile. There you go. I'll leave it there.
Wow, that was fantastic.
I want a pair of adventure trousers.
I know.
Well, that's one of the funny things that I found about writing stories is that they're in the Mabinogion. They're always banging on about brocaded silk stuff. Everything is brocaded silk this and brocaded silk that, which I think was to illustrate how high status someone was. So it felt good to be able to write something about the clothes in that sort of way.
Yeah, where would we find some adventure trousers? Do you
Well,
think?
I think everyone owns a pair of adventure trousers, but they might not be made of action silk.
Oh, that was brilliant. Thank you. Thank you both for that really special sneak peek of the stories. And just to remind us, where and when will we be able to get the book?
Well, you can pre-order copies now, and at the moment we're doing this thing where you can get your name in the front of the book. You can kind of become a named supporter of the project, and if you just if you just Google the Mab, then you'll find the link to the publisher Unbound, their website, which is where you can sort of pre-order your copy. But and there are loads of different things that you can get as well if you want to. But we hope that the book is going to be published spring next year. But if you do pre-order a copy, and you'll be part of all of the. I send out emails showing bits of artwork and telling people what's going on and stuff like that. So I do keep in touch with everybody.
Well, and I noticed from the website actually the artwork is beautiful.
Yeah, really, really pleased. The illustrator Max Lowe, who's based in Cardiff, is just so brilliant. And we wanted one of the things we wanted to do, even though the world is set in the medieval world, we didn't want it to look all like Celtic-y and swirly writing and dragons and that sort of stuff. We wanted it to look kind of modern. And so Max has been brilliant at that. So he's got a really cool style that I love. And I think all of the illustrations are brilliant.
Yeah. So Matt shared a sneak peek of one of the illustrations from mine, and I'm so excited.
Wow. So if people go to the website,
Yes.
they can kind of keep up with the journey of the book being published then and see.
Absolutely, yeah. And also, if there are any teachers listening, then we're offering sort of packages for schools where you can sort of buy copies of the book, get your school's name in the book, and then also have things like virtual visits from me or Eloise, or downloadables, teaching content for the books as well. So there are things that schools can get involved as well.
Oh, wonderful. So everybody needs to Google the Mab and have a look at the Unbound website.
Yes, they do.
Fantastic. And just before I leave you both to get on with your days. One final question for both of you. So everybody's been listening this morning about these amazing myths and legends, and here's a little bit of your retelling of them. So if they're looking outside the window, like we said earlier, and see that Wales is full of these fantastic stories, what tips have you got for any budding young writers that want to write their own version of the Mab, or any other stories that they might want to tell? So Hanan, if I can ask you first.
Be brave, write the story that you want to read. I think that's really important, because a lot of the time growing up, I wished that there were more stories that featured people that looked like me, and it never occurred to me that I could just write them. So be brave and write the story that you want to read.
That's a brilliant tip. And Matt?
Well, one thing Hanan and I were talking about earlier was the amazing eight that are in Hanan's story. These sort of like this band of extraordinary people who've got these special powers. Hanan was saying it would be great to write like the other adventures for them. And I always think that's a really kind of cool thing to do, is to take a character that you really like already and think, oh, I wonder what would happen if they what would happen on their birthday or something like that. And I was thinking about that. I've been rewatching the Star Wars movies with my son, and we were saying, is there a canteen on the Death Star? Like, where is there a cafe or something? And I thought, oh, that would make a really cool little story. What happens when Darth Vader goes to get his lunch?
True.
So I think that you can use sort of stuff that is out there already, but sort of like make your own stories from the sort of like the bits and bobs that you can find around.
Brilliant. That's a great tip too. Well, hopefully we'll get you both back at the festival next year, when we'll hopefully all be able to meet in person by then, and we'll be able to hold copies of the Mab, and maybe some of our viewers today will have their own stories to bring along too.
Brilliant. Thanks so much for supporting us. It's so brilliant.
Thank you.
I sort of can't believe that it's happening, really.
It's very exciting.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both for your time this morning. It's been brilliant. Thank you.
Well, thank you.